Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we bring you the politics, the practice, and the pedagogy around public education. But of course, lately being the last, couple of years, we've been mostly bringing you the politics because when you have a pandemic, it used to be science, but now it's the politics behind science or the science behind politics. I don't know. It used to be wonky math, now it's wonky science. And so we bring you what we know as quickly as we can so that you can reflect around it with me. So today, there was an article that caught my eye this week about, and you've heard me talk about this on previous shows, where we've had escalating violence from parents, usually it's parents, other adults protesting mask mandates, vaccine mandates, critical race theory. And lately, it's been this slippery slope of adults allowing their escalating anger to take them where they previously wouldn't have been taken. And what I mean by that is doing things like, and you've heard me talk about face masks that have been ripped off teachers' faces, teachers being yelled at, by parents in their faces and sort of spittle coming out, very unsafe. Board meetings, school board meetings being interrupted by angry parents around the different issues that I just mentioned. And so now we've had national organizations like the National Organization for School Boards, the National Education Association, which is a big teacher organization, go to the Department of Justice and ask for help in knowing what to do. And so now, let's see, so citing a disturbing spike in harassment against school personnel in recent months, Attorney General Merrick Garland issued a memo on Monday directing the FBI and U.S. attorneys and those offices to meet with local officials over the next month to coordinate a response to the threats, which he says are not only illegal, but they run counter to our nation's core values. And that's true. I mean, we certainly, all of us are still surprised when we hear of something like that happening, right? Because we don't want to hit people. We don't want to hurt people. We don't want to threaten people, but some of us are. And so something's causing that, right? So while spirited debate about policy matters is protected under our Constitution, Mr. Garland wrote, that protection does not extend to threats of violence or efforts to intimidate individuals based on their views. And that's exactly right. The department also announced that it would form a task force with members of its criminal, national security, and civil rights divisions to determine how to address attacks that rise to criminal offenses federally and locally. The department says it plans to create specialized training and guidance for local school boards and school administrators on how to report threats and collect evidence for possible prosecution, not persecution. The measures come after the heads of the National School Board Association made a direct plea to the White House last week, asking for federal protection. In a letter to President Biden, the organization's leaders outlined instances across the country of school board meetings disrupted, board members threatened, and in one case, a protester arrested. The attacks faced by educators, the organization wrote, includes verbal attacks for approving COVID-19 safety policies, such as masking, as well as physical threats stemming from false allegations that the schools are teaching critical race theory, a legal framework primarily taught in graduate school that examines racism as a social construct embedded in policies and institutions. So these acts of malice, violence, and threats against public school officials have increased. The classification of these heinous actions could be equivalent to a form of domestic terrorism and hate crimes, said the group's leaders. I'm sure a lot of parents don't realize that some people are classifying their actions as heinous actions that could be equivalent to a form of domestic violence and hate crime. So the letter follows similar pleas from other educational groups, including those representing the nation's superintendents and secondary school principals. Last month, the National Association of Secondary School Principals said in a statement that its members, who are responsible for enforcing policies in schools, were facing the brunt of the conflicts over masks, quarantines, vaccines, and other issues. And to give you an example of how tough this has gotten, Dr. Teresa Hill, the principal of Walden Grove High School in Arizona, recounted the statement that of an episode in August in which 7 people refused to leave the campus, demanding that a quarantined student be allowed to stay in school. The situation led to a 3-hour lockdown of the school, 3 arrests, and after that, she started getting very intimidating hate mail, posts on social media, calling her a Nazi, a fascist, using profanity, and being told to eat the end of a shotgun. Now that's beyond the pale, folks. That's not what a school principal needs to be harassed with at all. The Justice Department's announcement was met with widespread praise, except for some parent groups, and this is an interesting side of the other coin. One parent group joined in rebutting the National School Boards Association's request that it criticized that federal intervention. It's shameful that activists are weaponizing the U.S. Department of Justice against parents, said Nicole Neely, president of the Parents Defending Education, in a statement. This is a coordinated attempt to intimidate dissenting voices in the debate surrounding America's underperforming K-12 education. It will not succeed, and we will not be silenced. So that's an interesting other side of it, right? Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, a Republican, responded on Twitter to the Justice Department's announcement, saying that Florida will defend the free speech rights of its citizens and will not allow the federal agent to squelch dissent. And here's the politics behind that, folks. To me, it's not okay for any parent to threaten, to intimidate, to put hands on school personnel, and that is not an amendment right? It's not a constitutional right that parents have to do that. And that's what the Department of Justice is trying to say. It's not that they're trying to silence parents at all. No, that's they're just trying to train administrators and school boards in how to better react to de-escalate situations instead of escalating them with arrests and so forth, right? So now I'm going to go to a topic that in my mind, in many ways, supports a possible response and solution, and that is empathy is the most important leadership skill according to research. And then from here, I'm going to go down to how can we start preparing our kids to be more empathetic? If we can start training kids to be more empathetic earlier, right, and to become empathetic adults, then maybe some of this guidance and training won't be needed for our educators, because we'll get groups of parents coming in over time who are not trying to escalate situations based on what they believe. So why would I have picked this article? Well, Empathy has always been a critical skill for leaders, but it is taking on a new level of meaning and priority. Far from a soft approach, it can drive significant business results. And as we know, demonstrating empathy is positive for people, but new research demonstrates its importance for everything from innovation to retention. And we're not just talking retention in the workplace of corporations. How about retention in schools? Because as I mentioned last week, recruiting and retention of teachers is going to be crucial, and is crucial starting like 5 years ago. So let's see. Great leadership requires a fine mix of all kinds of skills to create the conditions for engagement, happiness, and performance. And empathy tops the list of what leaders need to get right. The effect of stress. Okay, and we've had some of that in the last couple of years, right? The reason empathy is so necessary is that people are experiencing multiple kinds of stress, and data suggests it is affected by the pandemic and the ways that our lives and our work have been turned upside down. So mental health. Let's look at some numbers. A global study by Qualtrics found 42% of people have experienced a decline in mental health. Specifically, 67% of people are experiencing increases in stress, while 57% have increases of anxiety, and 54% are emotionally exhausted. 53% of people are sad, 50% are irritable, 28% are having trouble concentrating, and I'm surprised it's that low. 20% are taking longer to finish tasks, 15% are having trouble thinking, and 12% are challenged to juggle their responsibilities. I mean, those numbers are staggering, and they've just jumped off the chart because of the pandemic. Personal lives. A study in occupational health science found our sleep is compromised when we feel stressed at work. Research at the University of Illinois found that when employees receive rude emails at work, they tend to experience negativity and spill over into their personal lives, and particularly with their partners. In addition, a study at Carleton University found when people experience incivility at work, they tend to feel less capable of their parenting. Interesting. Performance, turnover, and customer experience are affected. A study published in the Academy Management Journal found that when people are on the receiving end of rudeness at work, their performance suffers and they are less likely to help others. And a new study at Georgetown University found workplace incivility is rising, and the effects are extensive, including reduced performance and collaboration, deteriorating customer experience, and increased turnover. So I know that I've talked about this happening in the schools. It's happening in the workplace outside of school as well. But empathy contributes to positive outcomes. But as we go through tough times, struggle with burnout, or find it challenging to find happiness at work, empathy can be a powerful antidote and contribute to positive experiences for individuals and teams. A new study of 889 employees at Catalyst found empathy has some significant constructive effect. Innovation. When people reported their leaders were empathetic, they were more likely to report that they were able to be innovative. 61% of employees compared to only 13% of employees with less empathetic leaders. Engagement. 76% of people who experienced empathy from their leaders reported that they were engaged, compared to only 30% who experienced less empathy. These are serious numbers, folks. Retention. 57% of white women and 62% of women of color said they were unlikely to think about leaving their companies when they felt their life circumstances were respected and valued by their companies. However, when they didn't feel that level of value or respect for their life circumstances, only 14% of white women and 30%. So 14% of white women and 30% of women of color, respectively, said that they were unlikely to consider leaving. I mean, this is double, just huge amounts, percentages, when their leader is perceived as empathetic. Inclusivity. 50% of people with empathetic leaders reported their workplace was inclusive, compared to only 17% of those with less empathetic leaders. Work life. When people felt their leaders were more empathetic, 86% reported they were able to navigate the demands of their work and life and successfully juggling their personal, family, and work obligations. This compared to 60% of those who perceived less empathy. So that's 86 versus 60. Cooperation is also a factor, according to a study published in Evolutionary Biology. When empathy was introduced into decision-making, it increased cooperation and even caused people to be more empathetic. Empathy fostered more empathy. Mental health. The study by Qualtrics found when leaders were perceived as more empathetic, people reported greater levels of mental health. Huge, folks. Wired for empathy. In addition, empathy seems to be inborn. In a study by London University, children as young as 2 demonstrated an appreciation that others hold different perspectives than their own. And research at the University of Virginia found that when people saw their friends experiencing threats, they experienced activity in the same part of their brain which was affected when they were personally threatened. People felt for their friends and teammates as deeply as they felt for themselves. All of this makes empathy an important part of our human condition at work and in our personal lives. Leading with empathy. Leaders can demonstrate empathy in 2 ways. First, they can consider someone else's thoughts, and through cognitive empathy, if I were in his or her position, what would I be thinking right now, right? Sort of putting ourselves in their shoes. Leaders can also focus on a person's feeling using emotional empathy. Being in his or her position would make me feel blank, right? But leaders will be most successful not just when they personally consider others, but when they express their concerns and inquiry about the challenges directly, and then they listen to their employees' responses. So it's not only putting yourself in their shoes, but actually asking them about them and showing that you are listening to what they're saying. Leaders don't have to be experts in mental health in order to demonstrate that they care and that they're paying attention. It's enough to check in, ask questions, and take cues from employees about how much they want to share. Leaders can also be educated about the company's supports for mental health so that they can provide information about resources to additional help. Great leadership also requires action. One leader likes to say, "You're behaving so loudly, I can hardly hear what you're saying." People will trust leaders and feel a greater sense of engagement and commitment when there is alignment between what the leader says and does. All that understanding of someone else's situation should turn into compassion and action. Empathy in action is understanding an employee's struggle and offering to help. It is appreciating a person's point of view and engaging in a healthy debate that builds to a better solution. It is considering a team member's perspective and making new recommendation that helps achieve greater success. As the popular saying goes, people may not remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel. We've heard that one, right? So to sum up, empathy contributes to positive relationships and organizational cultures, and it also drives results. Empathy may not be a brand new skill, but it has a new level of importance in today's society, as I've just mentioned why, with now the feds having to get involved in trying to train our boards of education and our school administrators in how to de-escalate situations. A new level of importance in the fresh research makes it especially clear how empathy is a leadership competency to develop and demonstrate now and in the future. So we've talked a lot about the adults, right? We've talked a lot about the Department of Justice handling the fact that adult educators have come and said we need help from some of the escalating violence and threats that are emanating from our parents. And now I've talked about why it's important to make sure our leaders develop empathy. So how can we make sure that our children, because you don't get trained to be empathetic, right? You can understand why it's important to get better at it, but you really need to always try to have an idea that empathy is an important trait to have. And if it's an important trait to have as an adult, we don't want to wait to become adults, right, to learn how to be more empathetic. So this was a great article. It came about the same time. Attentive adults increase children's ability to empathize. For human beings to function socially, they need to be able to perceive, understand, and talk about others' mental states, such as beliefs, desires, and intentions. There's no consensus among researchers as to when children develop this ability. Previous research indicates that it emerges around the age of 4, but research at Lund University in Sweden shows that children can demonstrate this ability earlier with social situations that they experience together with an engaged adult. So with her colleagues, developmental psychologist s2e39 has studied the simplest form of this ability, children's understanding that other people may have a false belief about something because they lack information. So as part of the study, children 33 to 54 months, so that's young, 3 to 4 years old, a little bit older than 4, were asked to predict what would happen next in an illustrated story that was suddenly interrupted. The researchers studied whether the children's ability to predict that the main character in the story would make a wrong move since he held a false belief would be affected by them hearing the story alone, in the company of an adult occupied with something else, or with an adult engaged in the story together with the child. Okay, this is important because in the days of adults being on their phones too much, we are seeing many times kinders coming in, pre-Ks coming in, not very socialized. And a lot of blame is being put on inactive and unattentive parents. In 2 experiments, the children were shown a film developed by the researchers about little Maxie, whose father moves his favorite toy plane while Maxie is playing outside. So the plane is inside, right? Maxie goes outside the plane. The dad moves the toy. When Maxie later returns indoors and wants to fetch his plane, the film freezes. The test leader asked the child if he or she thinks Maxie will look for the airplane at all, right? And in a 3rd experiment, the children were read from a picture book with the same story and illustrations developed by the researchers, in which the last page was torn out. So commonly, children under the age of 4 would respond that Maxie would look for the plane where it currently is, despite the fact that Maxie has no way of knowing that the airplane has been moved from its original location. So most children under 4 would respond that Maxie will find it where the dad moved it to, okay? Even though the character doesn't know that the dad moved it, okay? However, in the Lund studies, even among the youngest children who heard the story together with an engaged adult, there were impressively many who correctly predicted what would happen. Many children correctly detected and told us about Maxie's false belief, i.e., that Maxie would look for the plane where he actually left it. Surprisingly, these children did not remember the story as a whole better than other children, but specifically noticed and mentioned the fact that Daddy moved the toy when Maxie was not there, indicating that they paid closer attention to this particular feature of the story. It is well known among researchers that children as young as 2 show some understanding for another person's perspective through their spontaneous actions. For example, when small children are tricked or help others look for things. On the other hand, young children do not seem to understand what they understand and cannot explain the reasoning behind these spontaneous actions. So the Lund studies now shows that children can perceive, understand, and reason about other people's perspectives earlier than previously thought. Small children's early understanding of perspectives thus seems to require that they share perspectives with someone else, focusing on the same information at the same time. So interestingly, the studies show that children who attended the story on their own, watching the film or being read to, And children with an adult present but not engaged with the story failed in making the correct prediction equally as often. So being in the same room as a child is not enough. It is the active engagement of the adult together with the child that makes the difference. So again, if the child and the adult are engaged in the story together, the child has a much higher chance of understanding and be empathetic with the fact that Maxie's not going to be able to find the plane where he left it, but that because Dad moved it, right? That's a huge piece for a 3 or 4-year-old. In a new experiment, the researchers are now focusing on how children look at the film and book pictures in a particular way when they look together with an engaged adult. They're also exploring the newly developed methods potential for use in practice, for example, in preschools. This basic ability to understand that other people have their own beliefs, desires, and intentions, as in the story of Maxie, is fundamental for children's development of broader social skills and critical thinking. Strengthening today's children in both of these perspectives is essential. You can understand why, right? I mean, we have over the last few years, adults who have been crossing over the line. And so it's very necessary to start growing our empathetic kids even as early as 3 and 4, because now we know we can. But the key is starting with an engaged adult. So parents, grandparents, you really need to have that alone time with your kid with the phone and the device put away, put up. And that's our latest cry in raising empathetic, socially conscious kids who don't become bullies, who don't want to do crazy things like take up the latest TikTok challenge. For last month, it was destroying bathrooms and filming it. This month, the challenge is to actually slap an educator. Mm-hmm. No, we're coming out of a year and a half of many of our kids not having been in school, and their reality is it's a little different now. And I would hate to think of the reality that would happen to a child if they did something as awful as putting their hands on a school personnel, especially if it's a slap on the butt, because then we got sexual harassment. And that's, folks, that will not be tolerated. And that's a wake-up call for any parent, grandparent to have these discussion with kids to say, there is no way I will ever excuse your putting your hands on any adult, especially adult in a school setting. And that, I hate to say it, folks, but you've got such severe peer pressure out there that taking a minute to actually say that, even though your kid would say, I'd never do that. I know, sweetie, but I don't even want you near your friends who are thinking about doing that. If you have friends that are thinking about that, that needs to be that kind of conversation that you have with your child, just to be safe. You know, how many times do our kids do something stupid at school and the adults are floored, the parents are floored. I never thought my child would do that. Yeah, their brains are not fully formed. They've been away from their peer group. Their peer group is, wanting to do something negative, and we just need to make sure our kids understand we will not excuse negative behavior from them. And just as a challenge, parents, if you've got kids to go on TikTok, if you go on TikTok, how about we do some flooding of TikTok with positive school vids, right? We can have your kids, maybe you and your kids, talk about the cool things that are going on at your child's school, and flood TikTok with positive public education snippets, so that that's what we see out there, not the negative stuff. Well, as always, we have our little fast show that ends up feeling like 5 minutes to me. And I hope that I've given you new information to reflect over. I hope I've given you new call for action as far as how to raise more empathetic kids and how to maybe you be more empathetic at work so that we can learn to all be nicer to each other and stop this slide into the violence and disruptive behavior on the part of adults. Thank you, everyone. And after this week, I will be on vacation. So we're going to have a couple of sub videos, but we'll be back in late October with more information about what's happening in our public education arena. Until then, thank you, everyone.